And welcome to the SpartanMag.com VCast. Jim Comparoni, Paul Konyndyk outside of Spartan Stadium. Michigan State 2-3, three straight losses, and they get number 3 ranked Ohio State coming in here. And Ohio State, was started a little slow against Notre Dame, but been revving up a little bit lately. I don't know if they're at the top of their game, but the bad news is they're going to be continuing to search for it. Michigan State, in the meantime, they kind of have their blinders on, Paul. They're trying to work on their craft and get themselves up to a certain level. That's the idea I get listening to Konyndyk speak yesterday, Mel Tucker today, offensive lineman Matt Carrick. You spoke with Jaden Reed a little bit and Elijah Collins. I think they're focused on getting their own act together regardless of the opponent, which might not be enough for the scoreboard this weekend, but that's the sense I'm getting. Are you getting that sense? I think that's the right way to do it. Do you think that's the way they're doing it, or what do you think's going on with this team right now?
That's the only thing they can do. With we've been saying this. I said it after the last game. I mean, you just got to keep on making incremental progress and trying to work on the things you control. There's nothing they can do to scheme their way to a victory over Ohio State or anybody else on the schedule for that matter. It's just doing the things that you need to do better. If you're offensive line, it's like hand placement, it's avoiding penalties, it's like like alignment in some cases. It's just the little things. And that people don't want to hear that because it sounds cliche, but it's the only way to go about it. You just got to keep on working.
Konyndyk spoke today, and I thought it was really interesting to hear what he had to say. I mean, he's a hands-on guy. I think there is some progress there. Michigan State's running backs averaged 5 yards a carry against Maryland, but because of drop passes and some penalties, which were due to the offensive line on a few occasions, they were not able to sustain drives. And if you don't sustain drives, then you can't let that running game get more and more traction. I don't know if they've had more than 15 tailback carries in each of the last three games. They've gotten behind and so forth, and that's been a situation there. But I think the running game is kind of trending in the right direction a little bit. I thought it was interesting. He's talking about one of the penalties. I think it was Spencer Brown got the holding penalty down to the 6-yard line, ended up getting backed up, and they missed the field goal on that drive. He had his hands inside the framework, but he was very enlightening about what could be corrected on Michigan State's behalf. He felt there was a little bit of a slight alignment problem based on how the defensive tackle was shaded, and that affected the track, and now you're blocking at a disadvantage. So it all goes back to those inches that Tucker talks about, that everybody gets tired of hearing about, but it's the fine-tuning of a first-year starter, and that cost Michigan State a few yards, and then Patton comes in and misses a field goal. But sophomore, first-year starter type of thing, it's expensive, but type of mistake that probably won't get repeated with that look. And that's why experience is so valuable, because more and more that you put in the memory bank, you can become a better team. Michigan State's trying to get theirs an offensive line, and I don't think that's the biggest weakness on the team right now. I think that they're improving.
Well, I think one of the problems was going all the way back to spring. We know a lot of the guys that are playing now weren't available, right? So I just feel like if they were repping it more and more in the spring and they hadn't just been all like a skeleton crew, they might be further along. I think the offensive line is making progress. I think part of it is Konyndyk. Is that enough to see appreciable gains on the field? I don't know against a team like Ohio State, but again, it is like a one play at a time, one step at a time. And Konyndyk, just watching him out on the practice field at times, he's very, very good and very hands-on. He's very, very good at accountability, but he's also good at making the corrections and having it stick. And Spencer Brown's a guy that is a mindful kid that works his tail off. So he's one of those guys that I don't see make the type of guy that's going to make the same mistakes over and over and over and over again. Those are things that I think he can avoid. But yeah, Michigan State's got its work cut out for it this weekend, and it'll be interesting. I can't remember the last time Michigan State has had a good look or good production on the ground against Ohio State. I don't even think going all the way back to the D'Antonio era.
Even Langford, at the end of the game in Indianapolis.
That's the lone exception. That's a long time ago.
And back then, against some of those
10 years ago,
against some of those teams, averaging 3.7 because Ohio State is a good day's work usually.
Right.
And I think Samac is improving. I think you're seeing some improvement there, which is helping the offensive line get things together. Pass protection, as much as Michigan State has had to pass in these last 3 games, it's not been bad. They gave up 1 sack against Minnesota, and that was on the running back Broussard. We talked about that in the podcast and some other things. I question. It's interesting. I thought Harold Joyner was the third down running back pass protection guy, and there was a third down sack, and they had Broussard in there instead of Joyner. I don't know what that's all about, but Broussard gave up the sack. Not the offensive line, 1 sack on that day. Against Maryland, they gave up the 1 sack. It was a 4-man. It was a stunt, 4-man pressure, and Kapilovic said, you know, it was a bad preset on that one, or words to that effect. Again, corrective moment, but over the course of the game, I think Pro Football Focus had Michigan State having a clean pocket on 86% of their passes, which is a good day of pass protection. Right. So that part is coming along okay. You know, as far as Peyton Thorne goes, you know, Jaden Reed was asked today, you know, how's Peyton Thorne doing? And Reed said, yeah, you know, he kind of reached out to him. And in so many words, I think everyone's acknowledging that Peyton is kind of taking this a little bit hard right now. Was that your takeaway a little bit?
Well, I thought that from the very first week. You know, the very first week against Western Michigan, 4 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. He's talking about how mad he is at himself, and I think he's one of those dudes, you know, that lets sometimes perfection be the enemy of good, and I think he's down on himself, and I don't think it helps that, you know, fans are piling on right now and being like, you know, being as hurtful as they are on social media. I'm not, you know, and it has happened to a lot of different quarterbacks.
Hopefully he doesn't see that, but you know.
Yeah, how can he not? Okay, like
I mean, I'm part of my job is social media, but I don't see what.
It's impossible to avoid.
Well, I mean, it's not impossible. And that's what Izzo always tries to get his guys to just not look at it, which is kind of impossible.
And Thorne says that, but what I'm saying is what's impossible to avoid. It's the equivalent of you saying, "Hey, I'm going to DVR this game and I'm going to watch it later. Don't tell me what happened." And then, you know, your buddies text you and say, "Hey, man, did you see?" Or, you know, they don't know, and it's hard to avoid that aspect. You're always, or the negative energy. Even if he's walking to class and he can feel people looking at him, or, you know, and he's hard on himself. So I mean, there's a lot of different things. I think that he needs to do.
Is that mine or yours?
That is mine. Holy shit! Thank you, Zach. I owe you. What do you like to drink? What do you like to drink, man? What's your favorite?
My all-time favorite is Shiner.
All right, man. I owe you. All right,
thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So you want to tell people what went on here?
Oh, yeah, someone just gave me my laptop.
A guy that works for Michigan State, so good job by him.
Yeah.
Zach, so anyway, go ahead.
I think Peyton Thorne needs to avoid the negative energy, but he needs to not create it and not be too hard on himself, because it's not just him. And, you know, Elijah Collins was saying something to the effect of, what you guys don't see is sometimes you might think a throw of his is off, but someone's running the wrong route.
Yeah.
Someone's running a route at a wrong depth, and everyone looks at the quarterback, and even the quarterback might blame himself in those instances, but he's like, everybody needs to look at themselves and do what they can do to be better. And in a situation like this, with a guy as mindful as Peyton Thorne is, it's only natural that he would take the you know, the weight of the team on his shoulders, and that's part of his job. At the same time, you know, like I said, he can't let perfect be the enemy of good, and right now I think you know, he's at risk of doing too much or being down on himself, and I think he needs the support of his teammate and his family and in this program to turn things around. Yeah,
and it's been a mixture. We talked last week in the podcast about the interception against Minnesota when Daniel Barker ran a whip route when he should have ran a smash concept as part of the cover on 4th down, the interception. Thorne did not have the 2 receivers available to him that he's supposed to have on there, and just threw it out there because it's 4th down. But like Reed said, that's a perfect example of someone not doing the proper depth. That happened also on a 3rd down play where against Minnesota, where I think it was Barker again who could have shut it down at 3rd and 9 against a cover 3 that was dropping deep. Instead, he took it too deep, and I think it might end up being a sack on that play. But it's a mixed bag because, you know, the interception that Thorne got away with in the Maryland game, that they called the pass, the personal foul on that one. I'm sure Thorne is mad at himself about that, even though that play did not stand. So I don't know what
the drops in the Maryland game.
The drops not on him.
The Barker,
it's everything.
Yeah. So, you know, like, and he threw. I thought, you know, like, you look at the first half of the Maryland game, he was completing 83% of his passes. You know, 17 out of 20, I think it was at halftime. You know, so, and I think they gave him a lot of manageable stuff to catch. That underneath stuff that was wide open in the first half, it wasn't there as much in the second half. And then some of the stuff over the middle, like down around the goal line when they were stacked up there, Barker had that drop that would have gone for, was right at the sticks. It would have gone for, if he had caught that clean, it would have gone for a first down easily. So everyone's got to do their part. It's easy to blame the quarterback when things aren't going right, but it's an entire operation.
I was watching Ohio State against Rutgers a little bit, and I'm still going through it and going through some others. And Rutgers capitalized on a turnover on special teams early on, led 7-0, and it was kind of a game for a quarter and a half or so. But I guess what I'm getting at, I need to watch more Ohio State. But I've not seen Ohio State just pulverize teams yet. I know they got off to a big lead against Wisconsin. Wisconsin came back a little bit. I watched Wisconsin, Illinois a little bit also. That's the worst Wisconsin offensive line I've seen since 1992. And just changing gears on Wisconsin. I mean, they with Chris getting fired, going over that game, there not only was the offensive line bad, but there was one play, Paul, when they ran Wildcat, like in the first quarter, maybe second quarter, on 3rd and 2 with Braylon, the running back, whatever his name is, the freshman that was outstanding last year, and they put him at Wildcat, and he attempted a pass and threw a really bad incompletion on 3rd and 2, Wisconsin. And then later on a 3rd and 8, they're under center, and they run an end around. You're under center on 3rd and 8. For Wisconsin fans, I can see why they thought that game was kind of a Waterloo situation, although technically, 2-3 record for a guy that's been in the Rose Bowl, won the Cotton Bowl, that's a different story. But Wisconsin, I was like, ooh, that was some ugliness there. But Ohio State beat that Wisconsin team, put 55 on them. They put 55 on most teams. But without Smith and Jegba, and I'm not sure when he comes back, the wide receivers are very good with Harrison and the other guys, but I'm not sure it's quite the dragster, the drag racing component that they could put on the field against some teams last year. I don't know. I've got to see more, but I kind of expected the part that I've watched so far. I kind of expected them to just destroy people. They destroyed Toledo. That's Toledo. Scored 77 points, whatever, and it's still Ohio State. Everybody knows that. But, man, they didn't really destroy Rutgers.
Well, I think Rutgers is better than you think.
They are okay.
I mean, in terms of a couple things, they're a lot tougher, and they're a lot better run defense this year. Yeah. And I will say the same thing about Illinois, having watched them. This is the second year for Illinois program. Mm-hmm. They've gotten really firm on run defense, and they weren't last year. Rutgers has gotten a lot more firm on run defense, and they weren't last year. So we'll see what happens. I'll say this: every time I've seen Ohio State, and I think, there's an opening here, or they're not quite good enough there. They also tighten screws,
and
they've got the athletes, and they've got a lot of stuff going for them. And a lot of times, what you see that looks a little bit janky one week for Ohio State is fixed the next week, and so I would be pleasantly surprised if Ohio State didn't come in here and put a hole in Michigan State.
Yeah. So Michigan State, if that happens, Michigan State needs to recover from that and keep moving forward and keep trying to get improvement. I posted something, I might write about this at some point, but yesterday on the message board, I just put a question out there. In July or in August, how would you have ranked Michigan State's top 10 players in the program? Right. And I looked at a top 40 and a bottom 40 back in August and didn't put it together and post it. But my top 10 before the season, I posted who I thought they would have been. Jaden Reed, number 1. I would have had Jacob Slade, number 2. And I would have had Darius Snow. I would have had him high in the spring, but even higher after what he was doing in August. I would probably had Windman up there because you were hearing good things about him, even though we hadn't seen him in a green and white uniform. But and as it turned out, I think Bogle would have been in there also, Chris Bogle, the defensive end. What I'm getting at is I came up with, I think, 4 of the top 6 players have had these long-term injuries. 3 are out, of course, Henderson, Snow, and Slade, or they've been out. And then Jaden Reed is back, but he wasn't quite the same. But you're taking 4, in my opinion, 4 of the top 6 players in the program. And I would have had Peyton Thorne in the top 6 in preseason. I might not have him there right now. Maybe after this week I will. He's kind of in there somewhere. But any team, D'Antonio's best teams, Harbaugh's best teams, take out 4 of their top 6 players and show me who's not going to lose 2 more games because of it. I don't know if that would have made a difference in some of these games. I thought Minnesota came in here really strong operation. Washington was really good at that time. Might not have resulted in wins there. Maybe you beat Maryland if you're not without 4 of those top 6, and maybe you're 3-3 right now, and kind of catching your breath a little bit on that. But 4 of your top 6 players, in my estimation, have not been available basically since week 1. All collectively. and I think it's had an impact. 4 of the top 6. Your thoughts on that, Paul?
Yeah, and I think, like you can make it. I wouldn't know if I'd put Bogle up there, but I know he's important, and I know if you take Slade out and then you don't have Bogle and you don't have Pietrowski, that's a problem. So I mean, I know like what Michigan State's got going on now. We can argue about where guys belong in the pecking order. I would agree with maybe Slade being number 1. I just think not having that guy. I mean, all these losses on defense are a problem because. You look at their leaders too. I mean, Slade,
at every level of the defense.
Yeah, Slade is like he's vocal leader, and he's the all-around leader of that defensive line. He's the guy that people rally around. He's not there. That hurts. And then you look at Darius Snow and Xavier Henderson, 2 best communicators on the back end of the defense, and that's a problem. So but people don't want to hear that. Everyone's always like next man up, and it's kind of it's bull crap. So
I mean, fans shouldn't fall for that. Coaches have to say that because they're communicating to their players through the media.
What else are they going to say?
Coaches have to say that because but fans shouldn't fall for next man up.
Just like you look at Ibrahim at Minnesota. You take away Ibrahim from Minnesota, and he didn't play last weekend, but you take him away, and it's a completely different Minnesota team.
How are the Golden State Warriors when Steph Curry and Klay Thompson? They go next man up there? No, right. Everybody knows, right?
So I mean,
fans shouldn't fall for next man up.
I mean, at this point, it's about what can you do to get better with the pieces that you have and be the best version of yourself that you can be. And I know it's intensely dissatisfying for a fan base that wants more, and in some cases feels like they deserve more. But at this point, it is what it is, and Michigan State has to get better while playing, one of the most brutal schedules in college football. Yeah,
and so they're not going to talk about resetting their goals and everything, but in terms of the way I look at it, what Michigan State needs for a program, they need. It's back to in this year. I think you want to get to 6-6 and have a bowl game, just so you get a little postseason tradition going again. The extra practices, everybody talks about that. Those are important to have those during the holidays, to have those extra practices. Although it's not as many practices as it used to be, because the season goes longer and it's a shorter bowl practice period. But you want to get to 6-6. I don't know what that bowl would be, but 6 wins would mean if you can keep the team together and healthy, and at the end of the year, can you beat Indiana and Rutgers? And that's going to be about which of these coaches can keep their teams together. Because Indiana, their season's going to sink probably. Rutgers, they still have their heads on. I think Michigan State still has their heads on for now. So maybe you get 2 wins there, and then that's 4 wins. Then can you beat Wisconsin and Illinois to get to 6? And the Michigan State game could look a little different here when you get to 3 or 4 weeks from now. If they played last week or the week before, it would have been a problem for Michigan State. I'm not sure what that's going to look like 3 or 4 weeks from now. I don't want to close the door on that. That is possible. Penn State, end of the year, Penn State's pretty good right now. But anyway, I might be short-selling them a little bit by having 6 wins, in my opinion, would be salvage the season type territory. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I don't think you can have any other thought about this. This is a lot to me like the 2019 season. Is that the one that ended in the new Pinstripe Bowl? I mean, Michigan State was a similar situation. It had a lot of veterans that had a lot of high hopes for the season. We're talking championships, and rightfully so. A lot of injuries struck that team. Felton Davis. A lot of other guys got hurt, and they found a way to salvage that. And I think, Mel Tucker talks a lot about culture. To me, culture is finding a way to make the best of a really bad situation, and that's what Michigan State has to do. Losses are going to stack up. I mean, that is what it is. But if you can get wins against the teams that are in your peer group, that's a step in the right direction. And we say all this, looking at the personnel that Michigan State has right now, a couple other injuries, let's say a guy like Derek Harmon. Or someone like that goes down, and then all of a sudden you're really thin on the defensive line, or
another receiver or something,
or like a Spencer Brown goes down, or Nick Samak. You just don't know. Football's a game of injuries. We don't know if Michigan State's going to get anyone back, but they have to keep working and making incremental progress and doing the best they can with the pieces they have. That's all there is to it, and hopefully they do get to 6 wins, and then I think you can go. If you can do that, then you can point to the culture being in a good place.
Sure.
Then culture's not cliche. If you can find a way to make Shinola out of less than Shinola, then you've got a decent culture. And
I say keep chopping, and that is a cliche, and people get tired of hearing that too. But that's principally what they need to keep doing in there. Yeah. However you want to phrase it, they got to keep the nose to the grindstone, whatever cliche you want. And so far the signs have been good in that direction. Now, Michigan State's offense, they're lacking explosiveness. Among other things, last year they were so great with explosiveness with Kenneth Walker and Jalen Naylor and some of the things they did, but they had a lot of quick strike touchdown drives. They didn't have many 10-play sustained drives. That wasn't what they did. Now that they're not getting those quick strikes, partly because of players that are not available, partly because of guys that have graduated and moved on, they still obviously are not a 10-play drive team. Like Kabilovic said, not a lot of teams are. And if you have a long field, it's success rate goes down if it's a long field and 10 plays. They need chunk plays. Last week against Maryland, they didn't have one offensive play of more than 19 yards. And I'm not sure where that's going to come from. Yeah, I thought that Thorne was checking down a lot because those were the windows that were open to him, and they avoided mistakes for the most part in the first half. And they had one touchdown drive and should have had a couple they had 2 touchdown drives. Should have had a field goal drive in there also. So it was kind of on schedule, but at some point some explosiveness needs to come around. And Jaden Reed's not himself. He's getting back toward that, and we'll talk a little bit more about what he said about his injury in a moment. But the lack of explosiveness, I'm not sure there's a magic wand for that either, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, like we've heard this before. Whenever people talk about lack of explosive plays, it's usually a good indicator that you don't have the personnel to make explosive plays. I think Michigan State does have some guys that can get downfield, but I didn't see any examples of that. I did not see any examples of guys running wide open that were missed against Maryland. Like a guy like Keon Coleman, is he kind of hitting that wall? I wonder about that because that's one guy that you think they can make some plays, but a lot of explosives are plays that are short distance plays that turn into big ones.
Yeah,
and we're not seeing a ton of that. But I did not, Maryland kept pretty much everything underneath. I didn't see a lot of room for downfield shots.
Right.
And honestly, if a team doesn't have to if they don't have to load up and stop the run with extra personnel in the box, you're not going to get many one-on-one matchups for those downfield plays that Michigan State was so good at a year ago. And if Jaden Reed was 100%, maybe you get a few more. I still think Keon Coleman's got room for growth. I think Montori Foster's another guy that's got some wheels. And if you get 2 guys that can get downfield, then you can get some of the underneath stuff to Trey Mosley. Mm-hmm. But honestly, for that, a lot of that stuff to work, the run game has to work. Mm-hmm. And it's not working necessarily. And
on the occasion when someone is open, Thorne has to connect. Right. There's been a couple times when he's missed touchdowns, one against Minnesota, and then against Maryland he had Jeremy Bernard, I thought, could have been a touchdown on a crossing route.
But going back to Jaden Reed, what you were saying about his injury, he did have several. He didn't say how many stitches he had, but it was a bad
from
hitting the.
When he hit the bench against Akron, sliding out of
bounds. So it was like a freak injury. He's had stitches. He couldn't work out because it was a back thing, and he couldn't sweat on that. So he had a complete week off
because of the stitches. He couldn't sweat prior to the Washington.
So you're not getting any kind of practice. Your timing is off, and Peyton Thorne and Jaden Reed. I know they need to work together now with Jaden Reed at his current speed. You know what I'm saying? He's not as explosive as he has been. It's not like he can just put the ball out there like he could last year and he can go and get it.
Right.
And so there's got to be a little bit more finesse there. And but Jaden Reed is staying positive and he's trying to keep Peyton Thorne upbeat. And we'll see if they can make any progress this weekend.
And Jaden Reed was asked how is his health, and he didn't quite say 100%, but he says he's fine. Or what did he say?
Yeah, he's a guy that's played.
He's not fine.
He's a guy he's like I said, he's an old school like Derek Mason or Muhsin Muhammad. He's a guy that he's like one of those guys in the NFL like Steve Smith used to be that you could play hurt, and he's just going to give you everything he's got every week. What bothered him the most about Washington wasn't the fact that he was hurt; it was the fact that he missed a game. He's never went healthy or not sitting out because of transfer, not played in the game, and he said that drove him absolutely crazy. He didn't come out and say that. He didn't come out and say that he was 100%, which is what I'd expect him to say if he was 85. But he said that he feels like he's getting himself back, and he's done all the treatment, and we'll see. There were a handful of times watching him like in person, real time last weekend, where he looked like old Jaden Reed. But there's also a few times where he didn't look like Jaden Reed at all, and I wonder on some of those out routes or some of those like where you're making hard cuts. I wonder if that back is bothering him. But
yeah, it is. I mean, like late in the game, before Michigan State's last possession, and of course it ended with a 4th down scramble by Peyton Thorne. I think first down, Jeremy Bernard was open. Second down, I think it was that deep corner fade to Reed, diving catch attempt. It would have been a spectacular catch.
But that would have been something we would not have been surprised about. You watch go back and watch the bowl game last year and some of the catches that he made
against Penn State, 4th down, diving the exact same similar diving catch. It's hard to expect the spectacular from him, but I'm wondering if last year's Jaden Reed or a healthy Jaden Reed makes that catch, kick an extra point, down by 1 touchdown, a stop away from maybe forcing overtime and stealing an overtime situation. Maryland was the better team, but Jaden Reed was in a position where some heroics there would have been much needed. He did everything he could. The rest of my point on that, he dove for it, didn't catch it. Now I think it's 3rd down. That might have been 1st down. Yeah, that was 1st down. He dove for it, didn't get it, and he went right to the bench and didn't come back in. That's when Bernard came in on 2nd down, was open, and he missed him. You know he wouldn't be sitting out if he could play. Right. So there's no question he's playing through pain, and this is a team that needs every ounce of playmaking ability that they can get on offense, and he's the best on the team, one of the best in the Big Ten when healthy, but doing what he can like the rest of these guys are, but sometimes even the next man up who's still in there is not what he can be or used to be. But maybe he'll be that way soon, and that's what they're still digging for right now. Jaden Mangum spoke today, freshman, had his first start against Maryland. Really interesting guy. He'll be a great one to interview here in the years ahead, Paul. I think he's a bright-eyed individual that had some interesting comments, and you'll see the video on the YouTube channel. An interesting one to watch. He'll be a favorite. A thin guy. He reminds me a little bit of a young Curtis Drummond a little bit, and I don't want to put that much on him because Curtis Drummond became Defensive Back of the Year in the Big Ten as a senior, but
longer, thinner than Drummond. I mean, Drummond.
But we didn't see. But Drummond redshirted his freshman year. We didn't see him start.
Right.
So Drummond was able to redshirt, and then as a redshirt freshman was second string behind Trenton Robinson, and then became like a spot starter as a 3rd-year sophomore, which is the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
They don't have that luxury here. But as a young Curtis Drummond, maybe Mangum reminds me of that a little bit. And I thought he was interesting today.
Yeah,
Paul.
I mean, here's a guy. You talk about playing for the future, and I think Mangum's a great example of that. Might he get picked on this weekend? Oh heck yeah, he's going to get picked on this weekend, and that's going to be a learning experience for him. But I really think when you think about playing for the future, moving Angelo Gross back to nickel, where he's got less on his plate, he's more in a certain area, and he can see ball, get ball. That's a good thing for Michigan State. I think that's a better position for him.
Mm-hmm.
Might Mangum take a lot of lumps? Yeah, he's going to take lumps playing safety, but that's one of the things for the future of the program. I think it's a really good move. It's good for both parties. I'm not sure if Mangum's ready for it, but he's the kind of guy that he's got that personality where he's not going to get down. Mm-hmm. He's got like that. I mean, he's got like the young Otis Wiley personality where he just wants to attack it and do his thing and learn. Mm-hmm. And I like his attitude. I like his upside, and I think they could use a few more stories like that if they can emerge over the course of the year.
And I agree, Angelo Gross is good at the nickel, especially against running teams. But think back to the Washington game when Kimbrough was in the slot and they ran that switch release and beat him deep. Kimbrough is playing nickel and he's in there for pass defense. When if Michigan State win and if they want to play some man-to-man, when Gross is on the field in the slot, he will see that same switch release. And regardless of what you think about Kimbrough can turn and run and cover better than Gross can. So Gross is still going to get isolated when Michigan State plays man-to-man. Number 1 from East Lansing High School that plays for Michigan now. What's his name? I forget his name.
Andrell Anthony.
Yeah, Andrell Anthony. Michigan really isolated Gross a couple times last year in the slot. That's when Gross was a safety. So they're going to go.
Hasn't done anything since either.
Well, he got open deep against 2 games ago against Maryland, and they missed him deep. The quarterback did, but teams will isolate him, especially if you want to play a lot of man-to-man. You have to play some man-to-man, but I think Michigan State is morphing into a team last week, a team that was more of a zone team, 2 deep. Throw underneath if you want to, but we're not going to play as much man-to-man because that'll hide some of those matchup situations. As long as you, but some of the windows were more open than they should be. There's if you watch Iowa or Minnesota, when they on the catch, there's usually a guy there earlier tackling down. Michigan State, they don't have it all together. They've made some progress, but that needs to tighten up more and more. I think that's the way they need to play going forward. Now you can't play 4 deep every single play. You got to mix it up because every coverage has a weakness. And I think after Michigan State scored to make it 7-7, I think the very next play that Maryland ran. They had that like 44-yarder on a busted play, and that was double post with an over route, which is a tower concept. Brian Kelly used to do that. We talked about that in the podcast. That, you know, when you know a team is in cover 4, there's things you can scheme against it, and there's some rock, paper, scissors to that. If we play rock, paper, scissors, you can't shoot paper every single time.
Oh, I can, and I will.
You will. Paul can, but most people can't. But same thing with pass coverages. You, unless you're Georgia or Alabama, they can just go single safety deep and go man-to-man and lock everybody up. Then you don't have to worry. But Michigan State does have to worry. They got to change it up a little bit. But the base being more of a 4 deep, I think that can become more of what they can be to beat Illinois and Wisconsin and Rutgers and Indiana.
Yeah, you can't do the man-to-man stuff unless you have a great defensive line and I mean, it's like without talent, it's impossible. Right.
Anything else, Paul?
No.
All right. Appreciate everybody checking in. For Paul Konyndyk, my name is Jim Comparoni. Been watching the VCast from East Lansing for SpartanMag.com.